Welcome to another episode of GovCast. I'm Nicole Osinski, Executive Editor for Government Fleet Magazine. Today I'm joined by Element Fleet Management's Bill Collins, Sales Director, Government, and Bill Blais, Director of Strategic Consulting Services. Today we'll be talking about the state of the vehicle market, what to think about when ordering vehicles, and EV transitions, as well as a whole lot more. Bill, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate that, Nicole.
Well, Bill Blais, I'm going to start with you. I have a few questions. What is the state of the vehicle market today? And have we seen improvements in vehicle availability over the past year? And we also want to know, what are we forecasting for 2023, 2024, and 2025? And finally, more directly, when is all this going to be over?
Sure. No, that's a great question and a very common discussion that we're having with clients today, Nicole. So thank you. I would say the good news is things are getting better. If we look back a year ago or even the spring, vehicle availability from a new car standpoint is improving, and that's important for our government and corporate clients because there's really been a backlog that's built up over the last couple of years as the demand has outstripped the supply. So if we look at more on the retail side, just as an indicator, new car inventories are at a 2-year high. That's going to have a trickle-down effect when we think about fleets on the corporate and government side. So from that standpoint, availability is improving. We are still dealing with some order to delivery challenges. If we look at historical OTD timeframes and what we're looking at today, they are extended, but those two are improving. A lot of the challenges today are still around more on the transportation side. So as clients are looking to order vehicles, we're moving back more towards a normal engagement process with the manufacturers. So more of a fall buy, spring buy type structure versus quarterly allocation, which has really been the norm over the last year and a half or so. So those are all positive signs. One wild card we have is obviously there's discussions going on right now between the UAW and the Big Three. I think there's a deadline later this week on Thursday that could potentially have an impact depending on how those ongoing discussions go. But beyond that, as we look out into the future, into 2025, we would expect to be that much more close to normal. You may have it be where there's specific models from a given manufacturer where we're still experiencing a supply-demand imbalance, but again, trending in a very positive manner.
And for Bill Collins, what should governments be thinking about when deciding to order vehicles? And is this a good time to consider rethinking their fleets and their composition? And finally, what might be some of the considerations for vehicle replacement?
Yes, thanks, Nicole. So, governments can employ a couple of strategies in terms of vehicle replacement. The first is they prioritize lower maintenance costs. So they're willing to cycle vehicles more frequently, usually every 4 to 5 years. Other governments want to minimize their upfront capital costs, so they're willing to extend those replacement cycles, sometimes out to 10 years, to give themselves a break on the upfront costs while willing to accept the higher maintenance costs later in a vehicle's life. With either option, we've had a real challenge lately, and that's when it comes time to replace a vehicle. There have been vehicle shortages. There have been model changeovers, with new models being more expensive. Sometimes the upfitting that you used for older vehicles can't be easily transitioned to the new vehicles. So governments are in a real quandary. And the vehicle shortage compounds their problems even more because government budget cycles don't necessarily mesh with ordering cycles. So obtaining vehicles when there aren't vehicles becomes very difficult. And sometimes when vehicles are authorized and then they can't obtain them, they're left with thinking about plan B. So what can we recommend for them? Well, first, be diligent with your ordering. Plan well ahead of the vehicles you need. Prioritize those vehicles that are coming up to the end of their replacement cycle. Look at the vehicles and the driver use of that vehicle. Could that driver use another vehicle that may be more available than the vehicle that they're looking for? These are all actions that governments can take to mitigate the problems caused by the vehicle shortage, and better plan for the vehicle replacement cycle that they choose.
Well, one area that has been strong for fleets over the past couple of years is the used vehicle remarketing environment. What are the expectations for 2023?
Sure, I'll take that one. And you're right, it's been strong, historically strong, really over the last several years. And we have seen it start to soften a little bit as we've gone into 2023. Expectations would be that it continues to trend over time back more towards those historical ranges. But with where we're at now, even though prices maybe have retreated from where they were a year ago, it's still a very strong market. I mentioned used car or new car inventories earlier on the prior question. Used car inventories are actually still very tight. Even if we compare that with a year ago, we have seen pricing come down a little bit versus last year, maybe about 8% or so as we look back this year versus this time last year. Supply continues to be constrained, which has helped propping up prices. Now, there are some factors that are likely going to have an impact on prices as we look towards the next 6 to 12 months. One of them is new car supply is increasing, so that will have an impact. There's alternatives. Also, if we look at where interest rates are, we go back to the beginning of last year, rates were near zero. Federal funds rate today is around 5.5%. From a used car standpoint for consumers, that translates to car loan interest rates over 10%. So that's having an impact. And we're seeing that repos are starting to increase. So there are some factors that are out there that can contribute to a slowdown in the remarketing environment, but the expectations would be that it remains relatively strong over the next 6 to 12 months, but maybe trending a little bit more towards those historical averages.
Well, let's discuss recession. If the inevitable comes sooner rather than later, how can governments best navigate these waters in light of trying to catch up with their fleets? And what tools can they employ to best tackle replacing vehicles with more limited resources?
Yes, everybody is actively trying to predict the next recession today, and everyone is pretty much inaccurate about it. But we know one thing for sure. Recessions come approximately once every decade. And in a perfect world, government revenues match government expenditures year to year, and there's little variation. However, when recessions hit, it generally causes a drop-off in revenue. States obtain the majority of their revenues from a combination of either personal income taxes, sales taxes, or corporate taxes. Local governments obtain most of their revenue from property taxes. All of these revenue sources are economically sensitive, and during recessions, all have shown that they can drop off significantly. So a drop off in revenue is very difficult for a government to overcome in a short period of time. One way they can address this drop off in revenue is really to employ leasing as opposed to purchasing their vehicles. And what most fleet management companies offer is what we refer to as an open-end lease. And an open-end lease is very flexible in that you can borrow under that lease, and even if it's a 5-year lease, after 1 year you can repay without penalty. That gives governments the flexibility to enter the leasing market and exit the leasing market as needed to compensate for a drop-off in revenues. And if revenues come in stronger in later years, or vehicle prices increase, governments can then exit that lease and sell the vehicle and actually realize the gain on it. So that aspect of leasing really provides a great deal of flexibility for governments going into a recession. And what we see now is sometime within the next several years, there will probably be a slowdown. So leasing is a viable option for a government to utilize.
And governments are in a bit of a quandary these days in undertaking their EV transition plans. What should they be thinking about as they focus on fulfilling mandates?
Sure. So very, very common topic of conversation and inquiry that we're having with government clients and prospects. And it's really EV, part of that environmental leg of the ESG still is important, and then social and governance as well. From an EV standpoint, on the environmental side, The good thing is with a lot of this is there's ways to track it. A lot of governments are working towards a goal of reduced carbon emissions by a certain date, or X% of their vehicles have to be, alternative fuel by a certain date. It is stuff that's measurable. Looking at things like CO2 output, gallons of fuel consumed. But really, and we'll touch on it more with the next question. But it's getting your toe in the water, doing a pilot, having some of those learnings. On the environmental side. And it doesn't just need to be EV. You can look at hybrid vehicles as a great way to transition into working towards some of those environmental targets. As we think about the social side of that, again, measurable. What are you doing to promote a diverse workforce and develop those people? You can look at things such as employee engagement indexes, percent of your employee base that meets some of those criteria. And then a big area on the fleet side too is on their vendor network, their supply chain. So like how much of their spend on the fleet side would be considered diverse, whether that's women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned. There's a bunch of different ways that we can classify it. So that's actually been a big area of focus for us, is making sure that we're able to provide that level of reporting that our clients more and more are asking for, so that they can, one, see how they're tracking over time, but two, directing spend to those suppliers when that's a priority or if that's helping them work towards a goal. And then, lastly, on the governance side, just more about making sure from an employee's, responsibilities, controls, governments, that roles and responsibilities are clearly defined, and, having oversight to a lot of these initiatives.
Then my last question is, to further the government EV efforts, what else should they be thinking about going forward that may be different from the way they've approached fleet in the past?
Yeah, when we talk EV transition, which is really the low-hanging fruit, if we transition the vehicles to electric, we're really helping the environment a great deal. We like to refer to it as a journey. A journey is a really nice word to say. We've got a long way to go, and there's going to be a few bumps along the way. Best thing to do for EV transition is bring your stakeholders together. This is what we've been mandated to do. This is our mission. And then take a look at your fleet. What is our fleet composed of? How many light vehicles do we have? How many mediums, heavy? How much equipment do we have? Let's do an analysis and see what's feasible for us. So we're going to start down this road. We're going to develop a transition plan. We're going to bring our stakeholders together. Then we're going to look at our charging infrastructure. How are we going to approach charging? Are we going to have depot charging? Are we going to have public charging? Are we going to offer residential charging? Once we have that, figured out, we want to move to vehicles themselves. Okay, what are the appropriate electric vehicles that will match the current fleet that we have? We have to make decisions about models, who gets what. We have to move through that process. And after that process, in another 10 years, we'll be in much better shape. I want to be a little different here. Let's take the glass is half full type of approach with governments. I haven't spoken to one government across the United States that hasn't either put an EV transition plan into place or is at least planning on one. A lot of governments are far down the road in terms of their transitions. They're actually adding vehicles. They've solved the charging issues, and they're actually making a real impact. And every vehicle that we remove from the gas-powered fleet and replace that with an electric vehicle, we're helping the environment. And we're already well on our way to doing that. So I think the glass is half full there. And I will actually tell you, I came over via Uber to the office today, and I was picked up by a Tesla. And the driver of that Uber was very happy to tell me that originally, when he had a gas-powered vehicle, fuel cost him $350 a week. And now he uses public charging, and it's less than half of that cost. So we're already well on our way to a successful transition, and everyone across the country is involved in it.
Well, that's a lot of great insight, and I think a lot for fleets to really think about. There's a lot happening right now. But thank you both for joining me today and answering my questions.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
And thank you to all of our viewers for joining us again for another episode. Stay tuned for more GovCast episodes where we talk all things fleet.